Mighty fine, mighty fine. Welcome to All Guitars Buzz, the weekly guitar-centric podcast that dives into a variety of topics, including guitar repair, building, what's on my bench, guitar news worth mentioning, customer stories, buying, selling, trading, along with existential philosophical ramblings. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, stick around. We had some interesting guitars come through the shop. We had a Dan Armstrong bass. This is one of those acrylic ones. Super heavy, but also super rad. If you've never seen one of those, I highly suggest you hop on the internet and just search Dan Armstrong bass. Might as well put acrylic in there, and you'll see it. We also had a Rickenbacker fretless bass roll through. Now, this is fretless from the factory, and it's rare that you see one, but a lot of times when you convert a bass into fretless, you will, first you pull the frets, and then you will fill the frets with a variety of things. Some people even use like wood putty, but I would suggest not using that. We use like a Teflon strip that we get from a Train hobby shop. They come in a variety of thicknesses, but we'll use that with some super glue and we'll fill it. So you'll see lines on the fingerboard once it's converted to fretless. This doesn't have any lines. It's from the factory, super rare. I've never seen one. So that's pretty cool. You might say to yourself, hey, Kenny, what have you been up to? Well, I got some news on that Serviceman Stratocaster that I was converting to hardtail, and I was filling it with epoxy. Last week, the epoxy dripped out of the top and made a mess over everything. If you want to hear what happened there, go check out episode 2. And then this time, I made sure that it was watertight, and it was, and I went ahead and mixed some. I have epoxy tints. There are tints specially formulated for epoxy, and the guitar is like brown, mahogany. It's natural. So I went ahead and you start to feel kind of like an artist. You got your hat on, you got your little palette. At least that's what I picture myself looking like. Anyways, you get these tinted epoxy tints, and you drip them into the epoxy, and then you stir. And I use Total Boat. This is the one that has a long open time, supposedly long open time. I really do think with epoxies, the open time has to do with the weather. So it went from being pretty chilly in San Diego to hot all of a sudden. Then it cooled down a little bit, and now it's hot again. And so not that happened within the course of like an hour that I'm mixing this epoxy. But anyways, check out what happened. So I pour the epoxy in the back cavity of the Strat, like where the springs go and where the bridge block is. It's tail block or whatever you call it. And it goes in good. And I'm getting the standard little bubbles floating to the top. And so I go ahead and get my lighter, which I've done a lot of times in the past. Sometimes I even use a torch, and I've had good results with doing this. But anyways, you just lightly hit it and the bubbles will pop. And this time when I did it, it started smoking. And so when that starts to happen, Kenny starts to panic, basically. So I'm just like, I'm in I call it my dust-free room of my workshop, because that's where I have my guitar vise, my neck vise. So I have the guitar chucked up in the vise, kind of free-floating by the neck. And so it's hanging out there, right? And it's starting to smoke, and I'm thinking like, okay, first of all, this was just supposed to be a quick thing before I went to bed. And now usually I wear a respirator, like I mentioned before. This time, no respirator, because I was just supposed to be in and out. So it started smoking, and I instantly think, okay, I shouldn't be breathing this in. I got to protect my eyes. I should probably open the door to get some air in here. And then I'm thinking, like, what if this thing catches fire? So anyways, what I wound up doing, this probably happened in the course of like 30 to 60 seconds. So I took it outside where it continued to smoke. And, then I tried to go to bed, but I couldn't really go to bed. So I checked up on it, and I didn't want to leave it outside the entire night. It had quit smoking. And so I brought it back inside, and I chucked it back up in the guitar vise. And something happened in between. I'm trying to remember. Okay, at this point, the epoxy wasn't set. So, okay, here's what happened. So the tint started to turn like a green instead of a brown, which I thought was really weird. So I took a dowel and I stuck it in the cavity kind of where the block goes to stir it. That's what I wanted to do. And a big clump of hardened epoxy, I could feel it in there. It almost felt like a crumpled up piece of paper that you soaked in super glue. That's what felt like was down in there. And I thought, okay, well, that just started to, it's setting like right now. I pulled out the dowel and it kind of self-leveled back again. Then I went to bed. And so the next morning I went down there, checked up on it, and it did harden, but there was like a slit in it. Like probably a 1-inch slit that you could stick a razor blade in. And I did stick a razor blade in. I stuck it all the way down in there until it stopped. When I pulled up on the razor blade, there wasn't any residual epoxy like that was sticky or wet. So it had all cured, but it reminded me of like the tectonic plates or something, like the desert ground, anyways, that was super weird. So I just chilled out for a second because I was like, this is my second gnarly experience with epoxy. And like I mentioned, like, I dabble in epoxy quite a bit. I like it for unconventional repairs, especially if it's something for myself. I think it's kind of fun. I've always been that way, like in the back of your head, like you shouldn't do it, but like you're going to do it anyways. And if it doesn't work, at least you figure out firsthand why, but so far I've had really good experiences with epoxy. But anyways, that was weird. So I let myself calm down after that one. And then I went back the next day and I mixed up this time. So by the way, the epoxy did stay green, and not just green, but it was different shades of green. It looked like a swamp pond inside there, if you can imagine that. So I did the right thing and I mixed up some yellow this time, and I was going to pour it on top of the green, which I did. And there was some overflow and it kind of spilled on top of the body a little bit, which I was okay with because I'm going to come back with a router and route it flush. But in pouring some more epoxy, I wanted to pour it in the crevice that had opened, and I wanted to make it proud of the surface so I can, router it flush. And what I think I'm going to end up doing with whatever pickguard material I use for the pickguard, I'm going to take that same material and I'm going to route a back plate, but it's not going to be on top of the body like every other Strat. It's going to be routed down into the body so it's flush, if that makes sense. And I hope that my design will completely cover the epoxy, and then if anybody beside myself take off the back, you'll just see a block of epoxy there, basically. So that's the Serviceman Strat update story. I've had a lot of cool guitars on my bench. Last week I mentioned a Stratotone. I did finish that up, and the owner was super happy with that one. Like I said, I put a Lawler gold foil pickup where it just was a single pickup guitar, so it was in the neck position, and took the Hershey bar out, which seems kind of sacrilege because those Hershey bars sound really good, but so did the Lawler. It sounded like a gold foil, and that was a cool project that I finally buttoned up. And Another cool one. So, have y'all heard of the Roberto Van Lutherie School? Well, there's this guy named John, and I'm gonna mess up his last name. Reuter, Reuter, and he is a professor there. And I guess he's been there since the 80s. And this customer of mine likes to buy his guitars. So there was an acoustic guitar. It was like a grand concert. And yeah, it was a super nice build. And I went ahead and I did a Anthem install in that guitar. And that turned out really great. The customer wanted the action the same as when it came in, and he said that he set the action on his guitar. So, getting into the mindset of the customer, I don't take anything that customers say lightly. When I hear them say that, I think, okay, this guy has knowledge of setups. Not only that, but he bought a guitar from another well-known luthier that is a professor at this school. So, I better really make sure that action is where it's at when he dropped it off. And I explained to him, I do that anyway, but I went ahead and I got my gauge, and it was, where an acoustic guitar should be. It was about 90 thousandths on the bass and maybe like, 80 on the treble, or sometimes people like it the same on both sides. But anyways, it was where you should have it. So what I told him I would do, and what I wound up doing, is you take your calipers and you measure the braid, the LR Baggs braid, and then you take that measurement and you just take it off the bottom of the saddle, and there you go. So did that, and that one turned out good. I did a hi-fi install on a Taylor with a Florentine. Now that, I think it was an 812. And when you see a Florentine on an acoustic guitar, that's not really something that you see every day. And if you're not familiar with the term Florentine, just think of that big old jazz guitar Gibson ES 175 and that sharp cutaway. That is called a Florentine. So to see that on an acoustic guitar was pretty cool. Not only that, but it was an old Taylor made in El Cajon. So that was cool to see, because I have a Taylor as well from El Cajon. And, that was when it was early Taylor, basically. So if you see made in El Cajon on the sticker, you know that it's an older one. And those have had a chance to really break in and sound good. Taylors, I think, a lot of times get a bad rap because they're known, at least they were for a lot of years, to be kind of on the trebly side. And where they excelled was their live sound, like their pickups, and also the neck. So I think Taylor really took off with their 12 strings, because that neck played like almost like an electric guitar. And, 12-string players were just freaking out over that. And they're constantly experimenting with their electronics, with their pickup systems. And they would hold up to live, abuse of being on the road, changes in the weather, etc. So, that's where Taylors really pull forward. And not only that, but that trebly kind of the trebly tone that they were kind of known to have in the 90s. Once a Taylor breaks in, they sound really good. Especially, I know a guy that used to work there for a long time, and he said especially the Koa guitars. They take a minute to break in, and once they do, they sound phenomenal. So old Taylor, yeah, that was a cool guitar. And I told the customer that with the hi-fi, basically what it is it's two contact transducers that you glue on the bridge plate. And there's an interesting kind of I call it like an elevator lift system that they include with the pickup, so you could do it yourself. But he said he bought the pickup. We're a dealer for Baggs, but he bought it on his own and he tried it, and he said it wasn't going that well, so he brought it to me to do. And this Taylor guitar had a threaded insert for the strap button on the back, and so had to pop that out, and he wasn't used to seeing that. I see that on Taylors from time to time. And also the placement of the contact transducers is paramount, because you don't want the cables to be banging in there. So you're thinking cable management, as you should for all acoustic pickup installs, but especially with those, because they're contact transducers, but they're essentially kind of like little microphones. That's how you can look at them when you're installing them, or if you hear of this pickup. And so it basically, the pickup brings out the tone of the acoustic guitar. So if the acoustic guitar sounds bad, the hi-fi is going to make it sound bad. And so it's kind of like the K&K Pure Mini. Now the Pure Mini has 3 transducers that you glue on the bridge pad. This one just has 2. The K&K is passive, which is why a lot of people like the K&K. They don't want to deal with the battery. But the LR Baggs one has a battery, and let me tell you, it sounds better. The K&K one, you're at the mercy of the sound person. And so however they're choosing to dial you in. If you're the sound person, great. But you definitely need a little EQ pedal or some type of thing, acoustic guitar pedal, to get the tone right with those. Not so much with the hi-fi. However, this is huge. You hear every single thing on that acoustic guitar. So you put your arm on the guitar, like if you're sitting down with the acoustic guitar and you prop your arm up there on the upper bout and you strum a chord. If you're wearing a jacket or some sleeves, you'll hear those sleeves on the guitar. It comes through. So every little thing that you touch on that guitar will come through on the LR Baggs hi-fi. So it's just something to note. I'm not really crazy about it. I don't know. I'm just not. They sound very hollow, to me. They kind of sound like a bad microphonic pickup would in a hollow body guitar. I don't know. Maybe I'm being way too harsh. I think they can sound good with the appropriate player. You got to learn, you got to play and listen and play to it. You can't just be banging away chords, especially if the guitar doesn't sound so great in the first place. So anyway, that's the hi-fi install. I did a Martin copy, and I don't know if this was a kit Martin or what. He said, I think the customer said about 20 years ago, he played it at a shop and he was blown away, and it's his favorite guitar, and it was cool. It looked like a D28 or a D35, and it was kind of beat, like it was played. And it just needed the saddle taken down a little bit. I think we might have went down a gauge and strings. Needed a little nut work, I think. But it sounded great. It sounded like a Martin, and it was on par. That doesn't happen often with kit guitars. Usually, somebody that's learning puts them together or whatever. That could have been the case with this one. Maybe it's been worked on a lot throughout the years. But anyways, was an older copy, and sounded great. That brings me to my favorite repair of last week, and that was a Crown violin bass. Think, Taisco, made in Japan, Kawaii, all those brands. I actually had a long time ago a violin guitar, and man, I could see it was a height deluxe, I think. And it was it might have even had similar pickups, but this thing, interesting to note, it had almost like a scroll on the top of the peg head. It wasn't a scroll. It looked more square. It kind of looked like a Framus. Framus made stick basses in the 60s, and the headstock looked like that. But anyways, that one needed one of everything pretty much. When you looked down the neck, it was like, what, and the bridge wouldn't go any lower, and the action was high, and it was missing a piece of binding. Not only that, but it was the binding on the top, so it had the dots for the inlays. So I was going to need to do binding and some inlays. And Actually, that's probably why that piece of binding came off, because there was a crack right in the middle of an inlay. And so plastic back then, this is probably a 60s bass, was funky. I say loosely the beginnings of plastics. I don't, that's not true. But, they had to be still experimenting with what's what, because I don't think plastic shrinks like it used to back in the day. I think it's pretty stable now. We'll see. But it needed all new electronics. So it had a 3-way volume, master tone, and they brought in labella flats, which was cool. And by the way, when I put the low E through the hole on the tailpiece that holds the string, the winds at the end of the string weren't making it through the hole. So I had to enlarge the hole there. I added binding and dots, and then I aged the binding to make it look okay. And then there was a little lip because the binding was slightly thinner. And so I burnished that with a screwdriver, and it was smooth. That was pretty cool. And I did some miscellaneous fretwork. I'm trying to think. I just kind of gave it one of everything, and the customer said that he got it at, I think some person bought a house and it was in the house, and so it was a marketplace find, and the person knew nothing about it. He said he got it for cheap, and so he put a little money into it, and let me tell you what, that thing thumped. It really thumped. Talk about microphonic pickups, but in the best kind of a way. That bass sounded dead, thumpy, funky, really freaking cool. I was really happy with the way that turned out. And, so a long time customer of mine dropped off a parlor guitar. This thing is in rough shape. Think maybe, I don't know, it could be 30s, 40s, 50s. And he said he bought it from a lady in a shopping cart. Now, if you know my customer, he is the nicest guy. And so I could just picture him, some lady was selling some stuff out of a cart, and him being a guitar guy sees this parlor guitar. And, my customer likes to refinish stuff, and he's just getting into refinishing, and he does a lot of sanding and buffing. So anyway, I'm just kind of setting up the story here. So the guitar is called a Lakeside. You could barely read that inside. Now, when the customer hit me up about helping him with this guitar, he sent me a picture. I thought it was going to be like a Stella or something like that. That was the vibe I was getting. That was no, this guitar was built. It has binding on both sides. I think it's ladder braced. I'll have to stick a mirror in there and look again, but it's got a dovetail, and it's a slot head. It's a serious guitar from the time. And so if you're listening outside of the San Diego area, there's a city, a town, a place. I don't know. It's called Lakeside. It's at right before Ramona. It's called in East County, basically, Lakeside, California. And so I don't know if the guitar was made from somebody in Lakeside, if that was the name of their guitar company, or, Lakeside could exist anywhere else, But, so the neck is off. I should get to that part. The neck is completely off. The dovetail chewed up. It's just like someone put Bondo in there, and it's been cracked. The heel's been cracked at least 3 times, and it's just like rough. So what my customer wants is he wants the neck back on, and he gave me the tailpiece and the tuners, and it's a floating bridge type guitar. It never had a glued on bridge. So that gives me some leeway with the neck angle. And so leeway insofar as if maybe it's not perfect, I can compensate with how high or low I make the floating bridge, because time is the name of the game. That's kind of a big job considering it's in a bunch of pieces. And when I was trying to clean out the cavity with the chisel, pieces of wood were just chipping off. There was Bondo dust everywhere. It was just, but basically, part of the heel chipped off today. And so I'm going to glue that, or I am gluing it back on. And then I noticed that the fingerboard was separating from the neck. So I glued two birds with one stone. I put some glue inside the fingerboard joint, and then I glued the piece of the heel back on, and I actually took off the heel cap because I'm going to stick a dowel in there to reinforce the heel and all the pieces really that are glued together there. Then I'm going to glue the heel cap back on later. So that's as far as I got with the Lakeside Parlor. But what a cool project. I'm really stoked on that. Okay, it's time for some water cooler talk. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I've been talking with some of my coworkers about it and just trying to get a general feel. And as far as I could tell, I think everybody I've talked to anyways is kind of on the same page. Here it is. What is a luthier? Who is a luthier? What makes you qualified to be a luthier? So to start this off, I will give you Google's little definition here. Google says a luthier is a skilled craftsperson who builds, repairs, restores stringed instruments like guitars, violins, cellos, and lutes. They specialize in woodworking, acoustic design, and precise repairs to ensure optimal playability and sound quality. Then it goes into some other stuff here. Responsibilities, required skills, how to become one. I think the most famous luthier would probably be Stradivarius. But if we look at the question at hand, are guitar techs luthiers? I know several guitar techs that would call themselves a luthier. And so I'm going to throw out my definition of what I would call a luthier. I think that is someone that builds acoustic instruments, and they are looking at tone woods. They're using different kind of glue, whether it be hide glue, fish glue, tight bond. They're looking at the bracing, and they are most certainly tapping the piece, whether it be the back with the braces on it. They are tapping it, they're holding it up to their ear, or they are using a frequency analyzer to try to shape. They're shaving wood off the braces, and they are molding and shaping this piece so that when all the pieces are glued together and it becomes an instrument, it is the intended tone that the luthier set out to have. Basically, the sun rises and sets with tone for the luthier. I think that is huge. And I think that's a little different probably than electric guitar building. Now, I definitely think that a guitar tech that will repair an acoustic instrument with highly skilled abilities, and they are going to take into account, if they're replacing a brace, how thick should it be? How wide should it be? Should it be just like the original? Maybe I can make it sound better even if that's what the customer wants. And in which case then you are using your ear and your skill, you're doing some woodworking, but it's more than woodworking because you're using your ears. Maybe that's the common thing that I'm just noticing now, is that the ear has a lot to do with what I would call a luthier. And that term does get thrown around. And if you're in the inner circle of the music industry, I think a lot of times the word luthier comes with, it's a prestigious kind of a title with some clout. So if you're a guitar repair tech, but you do acoustic guitar repairs too, maybe even upright bass repairs, and you understand the mechanics of building, but maybe you're not a builder. Are you on the edge? And if you are on the edge, you might as well just call yourself a luthier, Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to call yourself a luthier if you're not a builder, and I'm definitely not saying, I'm not throwing any kind of a shade. I'm just trying to have the conversation. I think it's really interesting. What do I consider myself? And so here's another interesting caveat is I have customers that call me luthier all the time. So if they're calling me one, and the key word is customer, so if they're paying me as well, am I one? I mean, it's that old cliche that to become a professional, you have to get paid. Well, I am getting paid, and they're also calling me a title. You certainly wouldn't call a doctor if he wasn't one. If he wasn't qualified to operate on you, you wouldn't be calling, I don't know, the assistant doctor, unless there was some confusion, which I guess there might be. But anyways, I thought that was an interesting thing to throw out there, and I have a feeling that we will continue to talk about this. There's a whole bunch of other words that you could call what we do. A coworker of mine, one of the owners of my shop, he proudly, for the past, 50 years, has called himself a guitar mechanic. And he has such a great sense of humor, a really great guy. He always says that we're the pit crew, and he has kind of a realistic look on what's happening. Now, this guy, he's built instruments before. That's not his main thing. He's mainly a repair guy, but in particular, his specialty is acoustic instruments. And people do treat him with the utmost respect when talking about, Martins and old Guilds and old Gibsons and whatever it is. He's the guy that people want to talk to, and they respect his opinion. So maybe respect has a little bit to do with it too. If you're getting respect from the person, if you are using your ear to help with the repair, not only your ear, but your skill as a woodworker, then I would say that's close enough for rock and roll, man. I don't know. But all I know is there's a lot of guitars out there to be repaired, and hundreds and hundreds of guitars are being built every day, and eventually they're going to need repairs, and I think we're going to need some people out there to do them, and what you call those people is up to you. I will end this conversation with saying there is a new term being thrown around, and I would say it is luth. People use it as like, oh, I'm luthing, and there is something called a luth group, where you have luthiers on there, and you can pay some money to join this group, and you all can luth together. So there's another term for you if you haven't heard that one. Anyways, customer stories. I worked on a guitar for a guy. It was a Les Paul. He wanted it to be tuned to 432 in drop, I think it was drop A. So wrap your head around that. So drop A, 432, and instantly I'm thinking like, you're not playing in a band, because everybody tuned to 432. You got to be tuned really precisely. Wouldn't that be kind of wobbly sounding, like wow and flutter? Like, wouldn't that, and of course they're playing metal. Ain't nothing wrong with that. And if you play in 432, I'm sorry for this little rant, because I know a little bit of the history behind it. I know it's supposed to be, I think in very broad terms, kind of like a feel-good tuning, because it hits some part of your brain that kind of feels good. So, I don't know. But here's the weird part, is it wasn't drop A, because the B and the E string, he was also tuning in, I guess, what they call fourths. And I had to have one of the guitar teachers like break it down for me. In fact, I called him and I said, this isn't drop A because the tuning that you gave is different, and I think these last two notes are wrong. And he said, no, they're right. And he said, wait, let me walk to my keyboard. He said, yeah, they're right. So he's a keyboard player and a guitar player. And so 432. So anyways, I did it. And if you're not too familiar with drop A, B to B. So imagine your low E string is B, and you go da-dun, 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 and you go all the way down to the high E. If you start with B to B, that is a baritone. So he's like a hair away from being in baritone territory. So the strings, I think the top was maybe a 62 or 6. I mean, it was, they were fat strings, but he brings it in because he wants it set up. Now, I don't know how he picks. So I don't know anything about this customer. I did write him up, so I got a feel that he was very, particular about everything. And I think this guitar was like an ESP Les Paul, something like that, with a Tune-O-Matic. So I did my due diligence. I do what any guitar repair tech, I'm putting that in air quotes, you can't see me, but I do what any guitar mechanic would do. And you open up the nut slot. You even have to open up the Tune-O-Matic saddles to accommodate those big strings. And then where do you set the action? Not too low, not too high, because the lower the tuning and the thicker the string is, if you picture like a jump rope hitting the ground, the tighter you make that string, if you're trying to swing it the same amount, the less it's going to drag on the floor. So kind of just trying to give you a visual. So basically with low tuning and large strings, it's easy to get buzz. And so, but I put it where I thought was appropriate, and he went away for a week, maybe even a week and a half. And then he brings it back in, and my coworker just happened to be up front and took him in and was helping him. But his complaint, he brought it back. His complaint was that he was getting buzz. So that was the complaint. So all my coworker did, and he had witnessed, because we're pretty tight at the shop, so we vent to each other and all that. So he already knew about this 432 drop A fourths thing that was happening. So and he knew that I could hear everything that was going on. I was just continuing to probably work on that stratotone as that was happening. He took it back to his bench and he raised it. And he said, yeah, dude. He said, I checked the nut slots. I checked everything you did. And it was fine. It was just he was hitting it hard. And so you have to raise it. And then he explained this to the customer, and the customer said, yeah, my other guitar, the action is I had to really raise it to not get it to buzz. So it's the classic case. He really, I guess what he needed me to do really was open up the slots. That's something that he couldn't do, but it sounds like he definitely has some control over how high his action is. He's tech savvy to lower and raise. So, but his big hang up was buzz. Was it a micro buzz? Was it coming through the amp? I think it wasn't. Sorry, I got that wrong. Was the buzz coming through the amp? And no, I don't think it was. I think it was a micro buzz, just you could hear it acoustically. And so if you're you just got, there's a happy medium, but you have to pick what bothers you more. Do you want comfortable action and you control your attack? And if you hear it buzzing, don't hit it that hard, kind of a deal. Or are you just going to focus in that it's doing that and you don't want to change the way you play? And so you're just going to raise it or do whatever you need to do until the guitar quits buzzing. I guess that's that guy. So that was the 432nd guy. And now, drum roll please. The customer story of the week, and it's still going on. I call him the kill switch guy. So I guess it was a couple weeks ago now. I got a phone call from somebody that wanted an arcade style kill switch installed on their Jackson. So I asked him, does it have a pick guard? And he said, what's a pick guard? And so I said, it's a piece of plastic on the top of the guitar, and it protects the finish from pick scratches. And he said, I don't know. And so here's what I'm thinking when I'm having this conversation on the phone with this gentleman. I'm thinking he's a newbie. He's so new that he doesn't know what a pick guard is. And when I described it to him, he still says he doesn't know. And so I told him, just bring in the guitar and we will look at different kinds of kill switches and we'll see what your options are. So lo and behold, he comes in a little while later and he brings his guitar, and it's like a Jackson Dinky or something like that. And he expressed that he wanted a red. That's very important. The color was very important to him. He would like a red arcade style kill switch. So we hop on the internet and I start looking on Amazon, and I know there are other electronics websites that has kill switches, but I wanted the switch to get here relatively quickly. So I start showing him visuals of these types of kill switches, and he picks out one that is literally the size of an arcade button, so pretty big, and it's red. And I said, okay, cool. So I said, where would you like the placement? And there's a master volume and a master tone, and he wanted it right in between the two. So I said, okay, sure. So I wrote up the tag. I ordered the switch. The switch got to me. It wasn't prime. So, I mean, we have prime, but it didn't get here next day. It got here in like a week and a couple days. So when it arrived, I gave it a quick look. I thought, cool. I still had other repairs to do before I got to him. So when I finally got to his tag, I pull the guitar out and I start looking at things more carefully. Now, his guitar has a carved top, so I instantly realized that where he wanted the switch wouldn't work because it was on kind of a curve. It would need to be on a flat spot. That was number one. Number two, I realized that it being on a flat spot, you would have to have a switch that had a pretty long, shaft with a nut and threads. And so I bust out the switch that he wanted, and it had these two little tangs on either side that you would, and when you forced it through a hole, the tangs would go inside the shaft. And then when it reached, when the arcade switch was flush to the top, these two tabs would shoot out, holding it there. Basically, the switch was wrong. It was for like a pick guard. I should have caught it, but I didn't. Sometimes I make a mistake when you're writing somebody up. It's, these are just estimates also. You're writing up an estimate. And so if there's any problem or anything, you just call the customer and talk about it. It's hardly ever a problem, really. So yeah, there was two things that I caught, and I talked to my coworker about it because technically the tag was due that day. And so I was like, can we make this switch fit? And he looked at it, and first he noted that the placement would have to be different also. Again, it would have to be on a flat spot. But then, he said, well, technically it could work. I mean, we could do it. We could drill the hole, and there are those two little retractable tabs on the side, and I could cut out some slots to where those would fit in there, and it would be a pretty good press fit, and we could just make it work. That's the cool part about working with people that they can basically do anything. Really great guitar repair techs and luthiers, I should add. But anyways, so but in the end, I thought I'll call him. I'm a real kind of a call ya kind of a guy if there's any type of issue. So I called him and went to voicemail, and then he called me back. And I in the meantime, while I was waiting for him to call me back, I went online and I wanted to be ready to present him with two options. And the option that I had really wanted that red color. So there was a red kill switch, but it was small. It was probably the size of like an eraser tip on a number 2 pencil. And so like an aircraft switch, really. And so, that one was small, but it was red, right? That's the thing about that one. And then I found another one for him. It was the size he wanted, or pretty much the size, but it was black, not red. But the thing that both of these switches had in common is the shaft was long and it was threaded accordingly with a nut. So these switches would work. So he called me back and I started to describe to him, what the issue was with the switch that we ordered. And, he seemed bummed because he had waited 2 weeks. Now, the thing about the switches that I picked also is they were prime this time. So he would only be out like a couple days. And in the grand scheme of repairs, sometimes things take a little longer, and most people really don't have a problem with waiting a little while longer to get the job done right, So he seemed a little bummed about the time, but that's fine. Sometimes, if I get the feeling like the customer is trying to have like the upper hand for some reason, like there shouldn't be any reason to have hand or no hand in this situation. All you have is me trying to do right by the job, basically. So I started to describe to him the difference between the 2 new switches that I had picked out that I was going to present to him. And after listening to me talk for a little bit, he basically said, just email me or text me the pictures and I'll make a decision. Now, when he said that, I was thinking in my head, well, he's a newbie, right? He didn't even know what a pick guard was. So I don't, so I said, sure, I will email you the pictures, but I'm trying to explain to you the differences here. And I started to explain again, and basically he interrupted me again and said that just email him to me. Like he was real, like his patience was gone. Like he didn't want to talk to me anymore, even though he's the one that called me back. So I was like, I said, I tried to level with him. Actually, I said, I could have just installed that switch and you wouldn't have known, and it wouldn't have, we would have had to do some retrofitting. And, I said, look, dude, I don't want to ruin your guitar. I'm trying to put the right switch in there and I'm trying to do my due diligence. And he was just like, email it to me. So I was like, okay, fine. Okay. So I emailed him the 2 switches, and then I had a day off from work. And so, when I got to work today, it seemed like things were just, things have gotten worse. Basically, he had gotten back to me and said, yeah, he said, I like the red one, but either of them work. So I actually ordered them both and they were on their way. And so when I got to work today, I see an email from him that my coworker showed me, and it said that he didn't want either of those switches. He wanted one of these, and he sent me a screenshot of 2 other switches. So again, he doesn't know anything about guitar, but now he's just choosing the switch. That's what we did in the first, from the get-go. And I didn't look at it good enough and check it. But now, again, here, he's just picking switches and saying that the ones that he approved, he actually didn't approve. I'm getting just this whole time, I'm getting a really weird feeling, just like an abort, like, sometimes you get the feeling like you can't please a customer. And my coworkers were observing me because I filled them in on what was happening. They were observing me. I called him back today and was talking to him about it. And at the end of the conversation, my coworker said, "You're never going to please this guy. He, and I agree. And I really hope that's not the case. But basically I called him today after my day off, after I had ordered the switches that I thought he wanted, even did my due diligence and ordered an extra one because I thought he might change his mind, right? And I said, listen, I saw you sent me a screenshot of some text message that I never got. This is all in an email chain. And I said, regardless of like, I didn't get the text, where you sent it, I ordered the wrong switch, whatever. All I want to do is put the right switch in your guitar and the placement. So I want this customer to green light the placement and the switch. And I don't want to move on until he does that, because I have this feeling in my stomach that he's not going to like it and say it's wrong and there's going to be an issue. And so I don't know. I ordered the switch that he sent me. I don't think it's going to be long enough, the shaft, in which I'm going to have to Forstner out some material in the back of the control plate to make the switch fit. No big deal. I'd rather order one that fits so I didn't have to do that, but whatever. So that's the dilemma. The switch is going to get here and I'm going to send him the switch. I'm going to say, I ordered this one as the one you chose. And then I'm going to say, I need you to okay the placement before I do it. And I really hope that he can do that for me so I can get this repair off my bench, because it is exhausting thinking about it. Somebody that doesn't want to talk to you, they really just want to communicate through emails, and they're sending text to places that you don't even know what number that is. And then he's saying I ordered the wrong switch when it's just a mess. It's just a mess. So anyways, I'll keep you posted on that next week, and hopefully it all ends good. And he goes, yeah, I like it. Cool. And that's it. So, man, I finally sold irregular size guitar case I had on Marketplace. It was a large brown rectangular case, and it was made in the 70s, and it had some unusual storage compartments, and I sold it to a lady finally for my asking price, $50, which is a bargain for a case these days. It was large, brown, had red type fur on the inside. Really cool guitar case. And I said, I guess this was my bad for making this judgment, but I said, so are you going to use this for like a project, or do you have a guitar to put in it? I did say guitar. I just didn't want to say, oh, are you going to use this for something else? But she said, no, I'm going to put a guitar in it. She was probably in her 60s. She was like, yeah, I'm going to put a guitar in it. And I got lots of guitars. And I said, okay, cool. I said, well, welcome to our shop. And yeah, if you need anything, let me know. She paid me, went on her way. That was super cool. I told you in episode 1 about this Cordoba with the hole in it. I patched the hole. I found out, stuck a mirror in there. It had a crack going from the bottom up to the bridge, and then past the bridge all the way to the sound hole. So put glue in that. I cleated it up as well, and I glued it. And then today I restrung it with some Salvarez high tension. Those are the strings I like to put on classicals because they don't stretch as much, and I certainly like that. And I plugged it in because Cordobas are known, they're modern classicals, so they have a truss rod and electronics. And the pots on the preamp that's on the side of the guitar, it also has a tuner, were scratchy, cutting in and out. Sprayed it with deoxit. There was some buzz, some high frets I knocked down. I adjusted the neck with the truss rod adjustment, and very fine classical guitar. So now I'm going to continue to, what I want is 250. People are trying to knock me down to 2 and then asking, can I see a picture of that hole? So instead now the hole's gone. And I opened up the hole, and then I got a plug cutter and some spruce, and I lined up the grain, so it's a nice repair. And so I'm going to I guess I'd probably take two after all that work. I'd probably take two, but I couldn't, as a guitar repair person in good conscience, sell that, knowing that it had all those issues, and I always disclose stuff. Which reminds me, actually, this is another funny customer story. This is just about disclosing stuff. So this happened on my day off. A regular, brought in a Rickenbacker bass he wanted to put on consignment. It was a cool color, apparently. So it wasn't Fire Glow. If it was a cool color, maybe it was a Sunburst. But I guess the action was super high, and the bass side of the neck had a lot of relief because I have two truss rods. So they asked him, do you want us to adjust this? Oh, okay. So he wanted to sell it. That's what he wanted to do. And so we asked him, well, we need to see if the neck is going to straighten out before we buy it. And he said, sure, check it out. So my coworker decided to try to tighten the rod, and it wasn't tightening. If anything, it started loosening. Maybe, I wasn't there. It's just like a secondhand story. But, and so he told the guy, and he's like, oh yeah, it's had some truss rod trouble before. I took it over to another shop and they did, my coworker was saying there was all kinds of washers in there and all kinds of stuff that was happening. But then he started to get mad. He said, so you're not going to buy it, but now the neck is worse than it was when I brought it in which case my coworker said, well, you knew the truss rod was a problem. You just got done telling us that you had taken it to another shop for this issue. So you watched me turn it and was trying to turn the rod, and you knew it was an issue. Why didn't you say anything? It's true, right? It's so true. Why wouldn't you say anything? So my coworker messed with the rod and got it back roughly to where it was and just sent the guy on his way. So funny customer story there too, but I wasn't there. But, and so back to the Cordoba. So I'm going to put it back up. I'm going to put it maybe I'll put it at 3 because I did the work. They knocked me down to 250. I want 250. I'll even take 2. And that's what people were offering me after all with those issues. But, they were going to use all its flaws as a bargaining chip to try to get it way, way down. And not sure if I've mentioned previously, but I am fixing up a Recording King Dreadnought. It had all kinds of cracks on the top, and we were a dealer for Recording King. They just went out of business, which is so sad because they were making the coolest guitars. The Dirty 30s were some of my favorites. They sounded real good. I was in Nashville visiting when the Dirty 30s line first came out, maybe like 15-ish years ago. I played it at a guitar shop and was blown away at how good it sounded. And so I went back to my shop that I was working at the time, a different one than I am now. And we were a dealer as well. And I ordered one, I think new. I think I only paid like $50 or $60. I don't know, for a concert size Recording King Dirty 30s. I still have that guitar. They're super cool. So this one came into my shop when Recording King was still a thing, and it had just a bunch of problems. The bridge was lifting up. It had some cracks on the top. I've had it for years. I finally got around to taking the bridge off, and I fixed those cracks. And long story short, I'm going to paint it and resell it, but I want to paint it a color that Recording King did not paint their guitars. So, which is hard because they did black, of course. They did sunburst. They did like a midnight blue. They did a bunch of different colors, but I'm thinking I would love to do like green, like a Cadillac green, or maybe a Fiesta red. And I'm going to put a magnetic pickup on it. I've made some really cool kind of like out of pickguard material and or acrylic, these mounts that you could put a single coil pickup in the sound hole. You have to put 2 screws on either side of it. It's like a permanent thing, but and a volume and a tone knob, and might even put an under the saddle pickup with a 3-way where you could blend the mag and the piezo, which in the past there's been a little bit of an issue doing that, an impedance issue where in the middle position only, you get almost no piezo. So if I could figure that out, that would be really cool, because I just want to flip it. So that's going to be a marketplace one, or I actually might put that one on consignment at my shop. The last thing I put on marketplace recently was ukulele parts, and they were given to me by one of the best luthiers in Luthier in San Diego that I know of. He used to work at Taylor forever, and when I was in a ukulele building class, he gave me all these, it's like a kit parts, because he was going to build a bunch of ukuleles and sell them, and he did build a bunch, but he had a bunch of stuff left over and he wasn't interested in doing it anymore. This includes like a side bending jig with the heating element and everything, pre-cut sides, fingerboards, even Grover tuners, like a lot of stuff. He had a bunch of tops, but I'm not selling those because I actually use those for other things. But anyways, yeah, lots of parts, and I have that up on marketplace for $200. I've already got hitten up once about shipping it, which I'm not going to do, or I just put it on Reverb. And then somebody was asking me if there was guitar parts as well as ukulele parts, but there's not. There's just ukulele parts. But that's an interesting one. You would have to be really into, guitar building to see that and want that and know its value. In other news, I have a YouTube channel. It's at Hillington Guitars, one word, and I'm about to drop a video I've been working on for probably, the video itself for probably 5 months, but the guitar I'm repairing in the video it took me like a year, and it is an X series Martin. So those are like high pressure lamb. They're not even wood, really. I don't think so. Yeah, they're all laminate. So I had to use some interesting adhesives to make it work. And I did it for my cousin Steven, and he recently passed away, so the guitar was pretty much smashed. And so that video will be the story of me. It's a story of redemption, really. Me re-gluing, my cousin's favorite guitar, and how that went. And so that's going to drop soon. Hopefully. The videos are really hard for me to make, and that's why I started doing this podcast, because it's really easy for me to just sit in front of the microphone and just talk. It's really it's therapeutic for me too. I'm really liking it so far. So thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I hope you're enjoying it. I'm certainly enjoying sitting here yapping. And if you want to check out where else I'm posting stuff, my Instagram is Kenneth_Hillington. My YouTube channel is at Hillington Guitars, HILLINGTON Guitars, one word. And I have a contact. I just made allguitarsbuzz@gmail.com. So if you want to go ahead and chime in on a little bit of what I've said on these episodes, or anything you've heard me say, that'd be cool. Love to hear from you. So thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time. See ya. Later.